Most Americans don't think twice about Alaska being part of the United States. But what many forget is that to get there by land, you actually have to go through Canada. And that simple fact may now be at the center of a surprising international tension. A quiet but significant diplomatic ripple has been making waves lately, suggesting that Canada may be reconsidering the terms under which the U.S. has historically had free overland access to Alaska. Now, whether this is a real threat, a political bluff, or a tactical move to gain leverage, that's where things get interesting. And if true, it's something former President Trump likely didn't anticipate during his time in office, and something President Biden now has to deal with in real time. Let's unpack what's happening here, and why it matters so much more than it first appears. First, a bit of geography to set the stage. Alaska is separated from the rest of the continental United States by about 500 miles of Canadian territory. The main land route between them is the Alaska Highway, also known as the Alcan Highway, built during World War II as a joint U.S. Canada effort to protect North America. Since then, it has become a vital lifeline, not just for tourism and trade, but for basic connectivity. Every year, thousands of U.S. citizens, military vehicles, and goods cross through British Columbia and Yukon territory en route to or from Alaska. Now imagine if that access was suddenly restricted, taxed, or even temporarily blocked. That's the scenario being hinted at, and it's not just an internet conspiracy. There have been subtle but pointed signals from within Canadian political circles suggesting that Canada might want to revisit how it manages cross-border traffic, especially in light of increasing tensions with the U.S. on multiple fronts, from defense spending to Arctic sovereignty to trade disagreements. Why now? There are a few key developments to consider. First, Canada is growing increasingly vocal about its role in the Arctic. With climate change opening up northern shipping routes and increasing international interest in the region's natural resources, Canada wants to assert its control over the Northwest Passage, waters it considers part of its internal territory, but which the U.S. and others view as international waters. This disagreement is decades old, but it's heating up again as geopolitical interest in the Arctic intensifies. In 2023, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's administration ramped up Arctic military spending by $4.9 billion CAD over 20 years, targeting surveillance, satellite, and submarine defense capabilities. Much of that decision was driven by increased Russian and Chinese presence in the Arctic, but it also reflects a desire to ensure Canadian control of its own backyard, especially as the U.S. and NATO push for more unified defense efforts in the region. But it's not just about the Arctic. Trade tensions between Canada and the U.S. are once again flaring. Disputes over softwood lumber tariffs, which have been ongoing since the 1980s, resurfaced in early 2024 when the Biden administration chose to maintain a 17.9% tariff on Canadian softwood lumber exports. Canada, in turn, called the tariffs unwarranted and damaging, and has filed new complaints through the USMCA dispute system. Then there's the issue of critical minerals. In 2024, Canada designated China and Russia as threats to its critical minerals supply chain and blocked several foreign investments. The U.S. wants more cooperation from Canada to access lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements, but Canada is being selective. That's frustrating to American companies, especially those in the EV and defense sectors. These trade and security issues are creating a broader atmosphere of friction. So it's not surprising that certain Canadian MPs have floated the idea, not as a formal policy, but in op-eds and think tank circles, that Canada should consider how much it gives the U.S. for free. That includes the Alaska Land Access Corridor. To be clear, as of now, there's no formal policy blocking U.S. access to Alaska. No gates have gone up, no soldiers on the border. But what's being questioned is whether Canada should continue offering completely unhindered transit rights, especially for commercial and military traffic, without renegotiating terms, particularly given what some in Canada see as a pattern of American overreach and underappreciation. Some conservative Canadian analysts argue that this corridor is one of Canada's strongest pieces of leverage, a soft weapon, so to speak, in bilateral negotiations. In a March 2025 report from the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, it was suggested that, quote, Canada's geographic role in facilitating access to Alaska is an underleveraged asset in dealing with U.S. trade aggression, end quote. And that's what brings us back to Trump. During his time in office, Trump took a transactional approach to diplomacy. he frequently insulted Prime Minister Trudeau, imposed tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, and pulled the U.S. out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a trade deal Canada had prioritized. He threatened to withdraw from NAFTA, forcing Canada and Mexico into a renegotiation that became USMCA. But despite his aggressive style, Trump never fully recognized how important Canada's geography is to U.S. logistics. Blocking access to Alaska was never on his radar. In fact, during a 2019 G7 summit, Trump reportedly joked that Canada was just lucky to be America's hat. That kind of comment might seem harmless, but to Canadians, it reinforced the idea that their sovereignty and their strategic importance is often overlooked in Washington. So now that the issue is being raised, even if only as a strategic talking point, the Biden administration finds itself needing to respond. The White House hasn't issued any official comment on the Alaska corridor discussion, but Pentagon insiders have acknowledged that land access through Canada is critical not just for civilian logistics, but for military mobility. In the event of a national emergency, Alaska is a strategic outpost. It houses missile defense systems, radar installations, and joint U.S.-Canadian NORAD operations. Any disruption in overland access could delay reinforcements or supplies. So, is this a bluff or a legitimate tactic? Many experts believe it's more of a calculated signal than a real policy. Canada is unlikely to outright block U.S. access to Alaska. Doing so would severely damage its relationship with its largest trading partner and risk backlash at home. But raising the issue reminds Washington that Canada does have leverage. It's a way of saying, don't take us for granted. It's also part of a broader trend of middle powers asserting themselves more boldly. Countries like Canada, Australia, and South Korea are pushing back against the idea that they must always follow the U.S. lead. In a multipolar world, even friendly allies are reassessing how they define partnership and how they protect their national interests. According to a 2025 Pew Research poll, only 52% of Canadians now say they trust the U.S. to do the right thing in global affairs, down from 76% in 2016. Meanwhile, 61% of Americans believe the U.S. should put its own interests first, even if it upsets allies. That mutual wariness is shaping how the two countries interact, including in obscure but important areas like transit corridors. So, where does this all go? Most likely the U.S. and Canada will enter into quiet behind-the-scenes talks to reaffirm or update their logistics agreements. The Biden administration may offer concessions in other areas, such as critical mineral access or Arctic research funding, to keep relations smooth. But don't be surprised if, in the next round of trade negotiations, Canada uses Alaska access as a bargaining chip. Not in a hostile way, but in a we know what we're worth kind of way. The idea that Canada would block access to Alaska might sound dramatic. It probably won't happen in any literal sense. But the fact that it's even being discussed reveals how the geopolitical game is changing. In a world where geography still matters, Canada holds a powerful and often overlooked card. And whether Trump saw it or not, it's now